Okay, so welcome to Math 317. This is lecture 15. I'm going to continue in the counting for the days of reading period and whatnot like that. So what I want to do before we go and do more on trying to model problems is discuss just how hard it can be to solve a integer valued problem, even if you know the solution to the real valued problem. So this is the famous knapsack problem. This is in the textbook. In fact, that's where I'm pasting this from. This is one of the best examples of just how difficult and how challenging this subject can be. And so we will plan on Friday being Mountain Day, and I will leave, in an emergency, if it's not Mountain Day, I'll do a video on how to sometimes go from a real optimal to a discrete optimal. So there are a few situations where you can do that if you have a very nice, continuous differentiable situation where you can then flow, and then you can say somehow the discrete optimal has to be near the real optimal. But in general, that is not the case. If we know our function happens to be increasing and then decreasing, so say it's like an inverted V, then we know that the discrete optimal has to be either to the left or the right of the real optimal. But most of the time, you're not going to be in that situation, especially in several dimensions. So here is the knapsack problem. So you have a knapsack that can hold at most 100 kilograms. There are 3 items we can pack. The first weighs 51 kilograms and is worth $150 per unit. The second is 50 kilograms and it's worth $100 per unit. And the third weighs 50 kilograms and is worth $99 per unit. So as soon as you see this, what is the first thing you deduce? So we have 3 items. They weigh 51, 50, and 50 kilograms, and their values is 150, 100, and 99. So what can you immediately deduce about the solution that's going to give you the knapsack of greatest value?
Well, you probably shouldn't pack X1 because you can't have.
No. There's an easier thing before even getting to X1. So X1 is worth 150. X2 is worth 100, X3 is worth 99, and their weights are 51, 50, and 50. Yeah, there's no reason to pack the last one. Why would you not pack the last one?
You get more per unit.
Yeah, you get more per unit for the same amount with just the second. They weighed the same, but the second one is worth more. This is somewhat similar to the diet problem where we had the unreasonable nutrients, where one configuration was just we would never use food 2. We would just always eat food 1. Okay. So we know it doesn't matter if it's integer, doesn't matter if it's real. There is no way we would ever use the third product. We'll keep it there. And so we want to try to maximize how much money we can get. And so if we let xi be the amount of unit or item I that we pack, then the total weight would be 51x1 plus 50x2 plus 50x3, and we want that to be less than or equal to 100. Do we really want it to be less than or equal to 100? Or would you write something else? So should the constraint be that the sum is less than or equal to 100, or should the constraint be something else?
You want it to be equal to 100.
So one possibility is maybe it should be equal to 100. If we're doing the real setting, I agree with you completely. Because in the real setting, we have the ability to take a small amount more. In the discrete setting, however, it does have to be less than or equal to 100. Now, for this particular problem, it will actually be equals 100. But so this is a big difference between the real case and the discrete case. How many of you have taken the AP calculus exam? When you took it, was there a large section using calculators? Half and half? But okay, so to me, half and half is large because when it was my turn to take the AP exam, there was, I believe, no calculators. Back then, we only knew differentiation, integrate. No, I'm not that old. So, it's amazing watching how things change. And in the 21st century, half the exam now is using an extremely powerful calculator. Why? Well, because this is the 21st century. No one does these problems by hand anymore. The question is, can you solve the problem? And so they want to test if I give you some standard tools, can you get to the solutions? One way to teach this class would be to co-list it with computer science and require you all to learn how to do linear programming, actually implement this in some system and have the solvers run. I thought about, do I want to require that in this course? And I decided no. I'm not going to require you to be able to do the programming. It's a good skill to have. If you can program, you will always have jobs available. I have some jobs right now, if anybody's interested, that require programming expertise. If you or your friends are interested, let me know. Right now, what I want to concentrate on is just letting you know what theory can handle. And then if you're in a situation in life where this arises, now you know, okay, if I download a linear programming solver, I can put this stuff in. The hard part is figuring out what are the constraints. And then sometimes what's a good way to do the constraints. All right, so if we want to try to get the maximum real solution, it's very easy. All we do is we look to see which product gives us the greatest value per unit of weight. And then just take all of that, go all in. So when you look at these numbers, well, the first product is worth $150 per unit, and it weighs 51 units. So it's approximately $3 per unit. The next is $2 per unit, and the third is just a little bit less than $2 per unit. So clearly just take as much of unit one as you can. So do we all agree that it's not so bad to find the optimal solution in this case? And the optimal solution in this case, when we consider everything real valued, is all of unit one. What would be the optimal integer solution? So what do you think the optimal integer solution would be? Yeah, it would be 2 of unit 2, 0 of the rest. Is this close or far from the real optimal? Yeah, it's very far. Not even close to the real optimal. And this is one of the reasons why integer value programs can be so difficult, because they don't have to be close to the real optimal. It's not just, well, we find the real optimal and then we slightly move around that to get to the integer optimal. The integer optimal can be extremely far away. Any questions about this? Okay, so this is just a really good example of the challenges in coming up with integer solutions. So one of the themes, later in the semester is going to be, how do we convert a general problem to an integer programming problem? And so a lot of things we would love to do are not linear. In regular mathematics, if you've seen some statistics, do you know what kind of transformation you can do to data that will often make it linear? A log-log. So if we apply logs to both sides, the new relation is often linear. And so the question is, if I give you something that's not linear, is there a way to linearize it so that I can use the machinery of linear programming? And the answer is yes. So there's lots of different things that you would love to do that we can linearize. We can linearize the maximum function, the minimum function, the absolute value function, the and, the or, the if, that, all these things we can do. Who knows what who knows what Tunstall is? There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That, for the most part in life, if you get something, you have to pay something for it. And so we can linearize a lot of functions that are nonlinear, but frequently there's a cost. And the typical cost is that we have to introduce additional variables. And the variables we have to introduce are not real variables, but integer valued variables. Frequently they're 0, 1, they're binary variables, they're indicator variables. While we have terrific algorithms to solve standard, real valued linear programming problems like the diet problem, we can solve that very well. we do not have good algorithms to solve problems where the variables are integer. And so we have techniques that will get us close and that will work, quickly, but it will not give us the optimal solutions. And of course, the more variables you introduce, you have to start worrying about what is the runtime. So what I wanted to do for the rest of class today is just do one more example of how do we actually construct the constraints. So, when we get to, exams for this class, you will have to construct constraints for some problems. You will not have to solve them, but you will have to say, if I wanted to formulate it so I could then pass it on to a program, what would the constraints be? And there's so many different things you could do. We could do the constraints for scheduling classes at Williams, right? What would be some of the hard constraints you would have to have for scheduling classes at Williams? Okay, so one is that because of division of the day, classes have to be between 8 a.m. and 4 a.m. That would be a hard constraint. Do people want to do that for today? We'll schedule classes for Williams. Let's schedule classes for Williams. I need to say this. This is a theoretical exercise. Years ago, some of my students, I will not say this when this is being recorded. I will share that for before class. So scheduling classes at Williams. So the first thing we need to figure out when we're doing something like this is what are going to be our variables? What are going to be our input parameters? So what should the variable be? So I think I know what I would use for my variable. So for the movies, we had at time t on screen S, we start a movie M, and that's 1 if it happens and 0 if it doesn't. So what should we do for scheduling Williams classes?
Time t and classroom C.
Okay. And then what? Right, so you got to use class X. So would you accept room as a friendly? Yes, right. Always think about what subscripts you want to use so that you can glance down. So we will let X T R C be 1 if at time t in room R we start class C and 0 otherwise. What does this look a lot like? This looks a lot like the movie problem. This is a classic scheduling problem. So what kind of constraints do we want? So one is that classes have to run. Before we start doing that, we need to think about what parameters are we going to have. What parameters do you think you might have? Okay, so one thing we need to know is what is the length of each class? So this is the runtime of each class. Now this is hard because we've got off the room. Maybe the length of each class. And that would be maybe LC. Now, what is a challenge about this? Not all classes are going to have the same runtime. And so when we're talking about scheduling, we could have, maybe times, 0 to 40 are for Monday, 41 to 52 are Tuesday, and so on. There's a lot of ways to do this. But we have, what kind of class structures do we have? Your undergraduates, what kind of classes can you have?
You mean in terms of time?
Well, yeah, this is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 50-minute class. We have Tuesday, Thursday, 75 minutes, but we also have Yeah, we have some of those Monday, Thursday classes. And so you can start to see the more of these things we put in, the harder it's going to be. And so a lot of that would be creating your list of what LC is. And different classes will have different structures. What other parameters are we going to need to have?
The capacity of a given room.
So there's going to be room capacity. What's a good letter for room capacity? Seats. Seats in classroom C. What else will we need? Okay, in what sense? You're absolutely right. And I was hoping somebody would say this. We need to know something about enrollments. So, certain classes are capped, certain classes are not capped. So for instance, a lot of people are not able to take a stats course or a computer science class. There's huge demands for those classes. And so we could have, capacity, we need more letters. We haven't used enrollment, maybe, enrollment cap for class C. And so you might have a lot of students who want to take a class. So right now, we might even have a two-step problem. So what are we trying to do? Are we trying to schedule classes independent of student demand? Or are we taking into account student demand in terms of what rooms we put classrooms in? Yeah, so frequently, we don't fix the rooms of classes until we know what the demand is. The first thing we fix is what time of day are the classes. And then we move the classes based on what the demand is and what they need. It's also related, there's some other demands which you may not be aware of. So as a professor, what do you think I might want for my classes? What might be desirable for a professor? And people can go both ways. So I'm trying to set my schedule, or you're trying to set your schedule. What do some students like to do for their classes? All later in the day, or maybe just try to avoid a day. I know some people try to avoid Friday classes if they can. Some people like to just do all Tuesday, Thursday, gives them more ability to travel. Professors often like to have classes back to back. So I'm in my teaching mode. I know I'm going to be teaching mornings, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Some people don't like to teach back to back, and they like to spread it out. And so when you have professorial demands like this, that then impacts when the classes can be. How many people are double majors here? How many people have ever had a conflict between two classes and two different majors? Why do you think that happens?
Because they both have to be at that time.
They don't have to be at the time, but how deeply do you think all the different departments discuss amongst themselves when they're having their classes? So I got an email from American Airlines that they have just changed one of my flights coming home from visiting my folks in Arizona. And they have moved up the flight by a couple of minutes. And so normally it's not a big deal if they move it up by a couple of minutes, but we already had a tight connection in Chicago, and this now gives us a 40-minute connection. And so I'm a little bit worried, we're not going to have any checked bags. Can we get from one gate to the next in 40 minutes? Now, part of this, of course, assumes that the connecting flight to Albany is on time, which, has a high likelihood that that will not be on time. But the person I talked to on the phone said something, and it was all I could do not to laugh out loud. And what she said is, you should have no trouble making the connection because we look at the flights and we try to make flights that connect onto another one have close gates to each other. I'm like, what? Chicago is one of your hubs. People are coming into Chicago from all over the place and then going from Chicago to all over the place. What do you mean you're going to make, my flight to Albany is going to somehow be prioritized? Now, they might be able to do this a little bit. And they might say, do we seem to have a bunch of people who are flying in here and then connecting, and they're going to have a tight connection. So the people who have tight connections, we will actually try to give them a gate close to where the flights are coming in. So when they're assigning gates, that could be something that they do. It's an extreme challenge. The more you think about it, the more constraints you can put in. It's not that hard to put in the constraints. The danger is you start to put in so many things that the model just hangs up and it takes too long to solve. Have we talked about Galileo dropping the two spheres from the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Are people familiar with this physics experiment? What was this meant to show? Right. And so what did he drop? I think it was two balls, but different masses. Does anybody remember what color they were? Why not? Yeah, why?
Because it's not necessarily an important detail.
Why is it not an important detail?
Because the experience about the.
Okay, so should color affect time of flight? No. I can give you a situation where it might. Imagine you have a white ball and a black ball sitting outside on a hot sunny day for 8 hours before you do the experiment. So they're now at different temperatures. Maybe as you travel through the Earth's atmosphere, the temperature could impact how you interact, and that might have an impact in what happens. But if you take two balls that were inside, kept at the same temperature, and then brought outside, the color doesn't matter, so we're not going to include that in our model. It's really trying to think which things truly matter when we're trying to come up with our constraints and when we're trying to come up with our schedules. There are so many things you can put in trying to decide which things really matter. So again, there's lots of different parameters we can start to put in. What kind of constraints are we going to have? So one of them was, classes have to be in certain times. What else? So a lot of these will be the same as the movie theater constraints. So you can't over-enroll a class. And so now what happens when you try to set up the schedule? Well, again, are we setting up just the schedule for the classes, or are we setting up the schedule for the classes and the students and their selection? And so what you can do is you can introduce student variables, right? So what should the student variable? And because we need a new letter, students are kids. That gives us a K. So what do you have to do as a student? Okay, so I need a variable. So what should my variables be for students? Well, before we had X, TRC, if at time T in room R, class C starts. So for a student,
Should be the same because they can't be in more than one class.
okay, but I need a variable. What's going to represent my student? I'm going to use a different letter. I don't want to use X. I'll use Y, my student variable. at time t in room R, the student starts taking class C. Time t in room R, student starts class C and 0 otherwise. Does that seem like a good student variable? So now can you give me some constraints? So it cannot be in 2 classes at the same time. So how would you do that? So it would be at time t, student, oh, oops. We should have a K. So student K starts class C. So in terms of order, it would be time t, room R, student K starts class C. Because we have to say which student we are. So at time t, student K is in at most 1 class. So it would be for all time, for all students. And then how would we represent that they're in at most 1 class at that time?
Time for class 1, so TC1 can equal TC2.
Well, I need something involving my variable, some kind of sum. So remember, every time I'm in a class that starts at that time, this is a 1. So if I'm in a class at a given time, what must be true if I'm in a class at a given time? I chose to take a class that started within that window. All right, so right now we're looking at things from the student perspective. So how would I look at what classes a student is in at a given moment in time? So you do some kind of sum over times. And I need to do a sum over classes. So I'll sum over all classes. And then I'll sum over times. And the time will go from 0 to the length of class C. And then how do I tell if a student is in a class at time little t? So y, and it would be t minus tau r. Oh, I'm using r, not c for class, sorry, right? No. Actually, do we actually need to know what room the student is in? No. So we actually don't need the room subscript. So it would be 1 if at time t, student K starts class C, all right? And then down here, we have at some time t, or t minus 1 or t minus 2, all the way up to the runtime of that class, student K has started that class. And what must be true about this sum? Less than or equal to 1. So this will guarantee that a student is in at most 1 class at a given time. It is possible to violate this constraint at Williams. You can be enrolled in 2 classes at the same time. I will not talk about this with the camera rolling, but it is possible. This, however, is a good constraint for most people. So what I want you to see from all of this is that we can handle constraints like this very easily in the confines of linear programming. Now, what if you want to have at most 4 classes a semester? There would be a lot of rebellion from students who want to do double majors because sometimes you might need to take 5 classes. Is there a maximum number of classes you can take? I know students who've gone up to 6. I'm trying to remember if somebody got up to 7 a few years ago. At some point, it gets absurd, and you don't really have to worry too much about these people. This will be handled by special committees that will accommodate. For most people, what must be true about the number of classes you take? Most people, I think, would be less equal to 5. With special permission, you can get up to 6. What about a minimum? I think you need at least 3 without, again, could be special permission to get up to 2. I know with COVID, they had changed the number of classes needed for graduation from 32 to 30, but I'm not sure for how long that is going to keep propagating. So for instance, for the freshmen who are just coming in, it might still be 32, but for the seniors, you might be able to graduate with just 30. I'm not sure if that's still in force. So we might have some upper bounds and some lower bounds. There is a very natural bound we need that relates the x variables to the y variables. So remember, the y variables is a student taking a class C that starts at time t, and the x's is do we start class C at time t in room R. What kind of relation do we need between the x's and the y's? So let's say a student wants to take let's say a student wants to take class 1 at time 5. What must be true if student is taking class 1 at time 5? The class must be scheduled at that time. So can you tell me how you would phrase this constraint? Okay, so if a student wants to take a class C that starts at time t, then we must start class C in some room R at time t. If my daughter were here, she would have the nice way to fill these in. I never do it as well as she does. So I will just not even try. This is the main reason I wanted to do some problem like this, because this shows us what we need to do to really drive the subject. This is not an unnatural problem. This is one of the biggest problems we have to solve in scheduling theory. And if we're going to do this, we have to be able to handle an if-then situation. So when we're trying to come up with a way to linearize, we have to be able to get things such as if-then. If this condition holds, then we want this to happen. If-then is extremely powerful. There's a lot of situations where if-then is going to come into play. We might have, for instance, if there's too much capacity, if there's too much demand for something, then some of these people have to be reassigned. And so we need to find a way to handle constraints like this. Okay. Any other types of constraints we might want to handle? And again, there's so many things you can do for scheduling. Can somebody think of a soft constraint, something that might be desirable, maybe among the faculty? When you're putting in your requests to teach or for students, what might be desirable, but we can't always guarantee it. So right after this, I teach Math 409, problem solving. Anybody know who's not in problem solving where that class is? Here. Why? Yeah, I have the class here before. If you want to give me one class in this room and then 10 minutes after this class ends, I've got to be in Griffin. I'm in shape. I can do it. It's just not desirable. Why is it not desirable? Have to pack everything up. Yep, it gives me much less time to talk to students before class and after class. It really cuts down on interactions. Is this a hard constraint? Should we never allow professors to jog through campus? No. But if we can avoid it, it's worth avoiding. And then the question is, we all agree that making me go to Griffin is horrible. What if I just have to go next door? It's not as great, but it's livable. During the pandemic, in that first semester back, how many people were in campus for classes then? We had, I think, an extra half hour between classes. So this was to give time to clean the rooms. This was to give plenty of time to move around. So there, it actually wasn't bad if I had to go from one classroom to another. So again, when you're doing problems like this, it's what you need versus what you want. And so if we're trying to schedule classes, there might be some additional information we want. So in XTC TRC, there might be some additional information that we are forgetting right now. What might we be forgetting when we use this as our variables? Which professors? So the whole point is, it's very easy to get wedded to whatever you start with. And there's this huge inertia to change. It is worth taking time to stop and think before you really go through. And again, we can easily do this class where I do nothing but throw equations at you all day. That is not the point. The point is to try to teach you a couple of lessons in life that will be really valuable. How many of you have ever watched these reality shows where people compete and you have so many hours to do something? It might be a cooking show, it might be Lego Grandmasters. They give you a small amount of time sometimes to prepare, or you can choose to spend some time preparing. And it's a fascinating question. How much time do you spend thinking about what you're going to do and strategizing, knowing that every second you spend on that is time that is lost in actually executing? But frequently, if you spend some time really thinking about it, you might save yourself a lot more time later on. Right now, none of this involves professors. This is essentially assuming we are in almost a communist utopian ideal where every professor is equally capable of teaching any class. And we can then just allocate the professors. And so this is a liberal arts college. One of my colleagues in math used to teach classes outside of math years ago. It is rare for that to happen. And by outside of math, I don't mean physics or computer science. I mean outside of math, music and English. Completely different division. So we need variables that incorporate professors. So the question is, how do we do this? So at this point, we have just whether or not the class is being taught. We don't necessarily have anything about who is teaching the class. So do you want to keep this as your variable, or do you want to change it? So one possibility is we could introduce a new professor variable that we first assign the classes. And then once we assign the classes to rooms, we then treat the professors almost like students and assign the professors. Or we could just immediately say, we know which professors are teaching which classes. So I was at a event recently with our president, and she was talking about the difficult decisions that needed to be made in 2020 about what would the academic year 2020-2021 look like. And there were a huge number of possibilities that were being considered. And at some point she said, there are too many things. We've got to narrow it down to two. Task Force 1, you're in charge of fully remote. Task Force 2, you're in charge of some type of in-person. And we're going to just go with one of those two options. And we can't explore 11 different things. We're going to make big cuts, figure it out. So when we're trying to schedule, one possibility is we first choose which classes are being taught. So this is, again, very similar to the movie theater problem, where you have your list of available movies. So when I say which classes are being taught, that includes which professor is teaching it. And then occasionally, there are small changes that are being made where they might change what class the professor is teaching. Is that we have a lot more enrollment in this class than expected, or somebody has gone on paternity, maternity leave, and we have to change things. But for the most part, once departments choose what classes are being offered at that smaller local level, that information is then propagated upwards. And we have internal discussions about who's going to be teaching at what time slot. So why does the college want us to talk about time slots? So there's two reasons why they want us to be concerned about what time everything is offered. There's that, but think about scheduling classes. Why might the college want us to be aware of what times we're choosing to teach? There's two good reasons why they should care about what times we teach. So think about it from your point of view. What might piss you off as a student? So in terms of when classes are chosen to be, what might piss you off as a student? So if all of the classes are scheduled at 8 o'clock, a lot of students are not going to be happy. Or if a lot of classes are all scheduled at the same time of day. A lot of people love to teach at 9 and 10, or just after lunch. And so if everybody is teaching then, it's going to be very hard for you to take multiple classes that you want to, because they're going to be conflicting. So this is one of the reasons why they really want us to spread classes throughout the day. The other, of course, is capacity. We only have a finite number of rooms on campus, and different rooms have different capacities. So we have to be cognizant of this in terms of choosing when classes are. So how should we change the parameter for classes? We could try adjust to maybe X at time T in room R, class C is taught by Professor P. So it's 1 if at time T in room R, class C is started by Professor P and 0 otherwise. And now what might happen is we might have as inputs, parameters. So for instance, for each professor submits, course preferences. So maybe for, X, T, R, C, P sub Miller equals 0 if C is not in math. And so maybe I'm willing to teach any math class. Or C is in algebra. I won't teach any algebra classes. And so you might be in the situation where a lot of your variables, you already know their values. I know we're not going to have Miller teaching algebra. I know he's not going to be teaching English or economics. And so we can set a lot of those equal to 0 immediately. Okay, so this should give you some sense of the difficulties and challenges in setting up linear programming. So the next big thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how do we actually convert statements such as if then to integer programming. How many of you have seen the traveling salesman problem? So we will talk about the traveling salesman problem as a wonderful example of integer programming. There's many versions of it. I think probably the more standard version is you have a bunch of cities and you have travel times between the different cities. You want to visit every city and minimize travel time. Instead of minimizing travel time, what might you try to minimize? So you might try to minimize distance you travel, and related to distance traveled might be cost of travel. So really, we want to minimize cost. The question is, how do we measure cost? Do we measure cost in terms of time? Do we measure cost in terms of dollars? And depending on what you're doing, for instance, if you're getting frequent flyer miles, you could actually be making certain stuff up by doing a lot of flights. Or if you have hotel stays, depending on if you have to factor in the cost of a hotel stay, you might want to try to minimize how many nights you have to stay and how many places can you hit. You could also have maybe different amounts of time needed at each city. I have to be in this city for at least this long. So, there's lots of different tweaks you can do. In terms of why you might care about the traveling salesman problem, one of the more interesting applications I've heard is when you're actually building circuits and you have things being physically made, you want the motion of the machine to be minimized as it traces out circuit paths. And so what path should be used to minimize? Because if you can minimize and you're producing things in huge volume, any small saving scales up wonderfully. All right, so the last thing I want to do is I want to just end for the video if we don't have mountain date. So given a number S, write S as A1 plus AN such that in case 1, each AI is a positive integer and maximize the product A1 through AN, or 2, each AI is positive and maximize the product A1 through AN. And so this is the problem. I want to maximize a product where the terms add up to S. And in the first case, I want the A's to be integers. In the second case, I want the A's to just be real. Which case do you think is going to be easier? The real. And this is one of the few problems where knowing the real max, I can easily find the integer max. This problem uses almost everything you learn in calculus. It's a great way to review calculus. Why am I not allowing any of the A's to be 0? The product is 0. What about letting some of the A's be negative? Okay, good. So instead of having an odd number of negatives, what should I have? Yeah, if I have an even number of negatives, I can make the product as large as I want. So to make the problem interesting, I force all the A's to be positive. Can anybody give me a lower bound on any of the A's? And then we'll stop. I want to maximize the product. Give me a lower bound on the A's. 1, right? If any of the A's is less than 1, just push it into something else. All right, so this is a good place to stop.